O Fronteiras do Pensamento apresenta a primeira parte da conferência Educação no século XXI, com Howard Gardner. O psicólogo fala sobre sua teoria das inteligências múltiplas. Acompanhe.
The traditional view of intelligence goes back about 100 years, and it consists of a number of points. First of all, intelligence is a single thing. Psychologists use the English letter G to describe general intelligence. Intelligence is highly heritable. That means it's carried in the human genes. So if you know how smart your parents are, or even better, if you know how smart your grandparents are, you can predict how smart you will be. Since it's part of the human genome, you can't do much about it. You are stuck with your general intelligence. Now, these are all views that I disagree with. I don't think this view is correct, but you can understand a new view better if you contrast it with the former view. Now, what's interesting is this traditional view of intelligence is a Western view, Europe and the Americas. If you go to East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, you get a very different view, a Confucian view, which says that how smart you are depends primarily on your effort, how hard you work. About 30 years ago, I began to develop an entirely different way of thinking about intelligence, not based on paper and pencil test, not based upon looking at brain waves, but rather an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach which focused on how abilities have evolved over thousands and even millions of years, how the brain has evolved, and how it's organized today in human beings. What are the different abilities which were valued in pre-literate times, in small clans in East Africa and in the South Seas and at the Arctic Pole? What do we know from special populations? Prodigies, savants, idiosavants, people with autism, all of whom have very jagged profiles. They're good in some things, average in some things, below average in some things. There's no way that the traditional view of intelligence can explain this kind of scatter. I put all of these disciplinary findings together. I established a set of 8 criteria drawn from anthropology, history, psychology, genetics, neurology, and I came up with a multiple theory of intelligence. For me, an intelligence is a potential to process information that comes in through your eyes or your ears or your hands so that you can solve problems or make things which are valued in at least one culture or community. That's the definition, but I think an analogy or metaphor works better. The traditional view of intelligence suggests we have a single mainframe computer inside our skull. And if that computer works well, you're smart in everything. If it works average, you're average in everything. If it works slowly, you're kind of dumb in everything. I believe we have several computers in our mind brain. Language computers, music computers, personal computers, and so on. And there are probably a few people where all the computers work well, a few people where none of the computers works well, but most of us are an amalgam, a combination of some computers that are quite good, some computers that are average, and some computers which don't work very well. That, in essence, is multiple intelligence theory. The first intelligence, linguistic intelligence, is the intelligence of the writer, the orator, the poet, the journalist, people who use language as their major activity. The second intelligence is logical mathematical intelligence. That's the intelligence of the mathematician or the scientist. Most intelligence tests only look at those two intelligences. And they're important for school, especially a Western secular school, as we had in Europe and then in the Americas in the 20th century. Whether it's appropriate for a digital school of the 21st century, nobody knows. If you're good in language and logic, you will succeed at most Western schools, and as long as you stay in school, you'll think you're smart. But if you should ever navigate the streets of Sao Paulo in an automobile, or you should ever try to survive in the Amazon, you will discover that there are other kinds of intelligence which are at least as important. Musical intelligence, the intelligence of performers, singers, composers, conductors. I understand now in Brazil there is a movement to get more young children able to play violin and other instruments. That's musical intelligence. A fourth intelligence is spatial intelligence, the intelligence that allows us to navigate wide space, like a sailor or an airplane pilot, or more local kinds of space, like a sculptor or chess player. My example of spatial intelligence is an architect, and I was delighted to learn that one of the world's most famous architects, Oscar Niemeyer, is still alive, over 100 years of age, and still working in Brazil. That gives us a lot of hope. A fifth kind of intelligence is bodily intelligence, the intelligence of the athlete, the dancer. Someone like Pelé undoubtedly has a lot of bodily kinesthetic intelligence. It's also the intelligence of a craftsperson or a surgeon, people who use their whole bodies or parts of their bodies, like their hands or their mouth, to solve problems or to make things. Interpersonal intelligence is the intelligence of understanding other people. Obviously, it's important for leaders, teachers, clinicians, salespeople, people who are in religion, who have a congregation. All of those involve interpersonal intelligence. Some people call it social intelligence. A very interesting intelligence is intrapersonal intelligence, understanding of yourself, having a good model of who you are, what your strengths are, what you're trying to achieve, what happens when something goes wrong. It's a very important intelligence. We don't know anything about how to teach it. An eighth intelligence, which I did not write about until 10 years ago, is the naturalist intelligence. It's the intelligence that allowed us to recognize the differences between plants, between animals, between rock formations, between clouds, the world of nature. None of us would be here if our ancestors had not known what to eat and what not to eat, what animals to pursue, which animals to run away from. But now, most of us don't have to work in the world of nature. We just go to the grocery store. But the parts of our brain which evolved to discriminate in the world of nature, we now use for consumption. Which automobile to buy, which sneakers to buy. We use that part of the mind-brain to navigate the world of consumption. There might be a ninth intelligence, which I call the existential intelligence. It's the intelligence of big questions. What's going to happen to us? Does God love me? What is love? What is God? I think this is a useful concept, but I'm not certain, because I would like to know whether there are parts of the brain which evolved to deal with questions which are too big or too little to perceive, these questions of existence. So now I say we have probably 8.5 intelligences. After over 25 years, I can reduce the claims of multiple intelligence theory to a very small number. 2 scientific claims and 2 educational claims. The first scientific claim is every human being has all of these intelligences. It's a definition of Homo sapiens, cognitively speaking. But the second scientific claim is that no 2 people have exactly the same profile. And that second scientific claim leads to 2 educational claims, both of which go against the practice of many, many years. The first one says we should individualize education as much as possible. And that means teach each person in the way that they learn the best and assess them, test them in ways where they can show what they have understood. Throughout educational history, we have done the opposite. We taught in only one way, we tested in only one way, and if you didn't do well, you were stupid. This is the first time in human history that we can individualize education more broadly through computers. Because computers can present lessons in many ways. Computers are very patient. They don't get frustrated. And if one way doesn't work, they can use another way. So individualization is becoming a reality in our time. The second educational claim is we should teach everything that's important in lots of different ways. Again, this is a very revolutionary idea. We should teach things through language, through logic, through works of art, through debate, through humor. We should teach things in many different ways. And if you do, 2 wonderful things happen. First, you reach more students. Because some learn better from stories, some learn better from mathematical equations, some learn better from works of art, some learn better from hands-on, where they construct things themselves. Second of all, if you teach in multiple ways, you show what it's like to really understand something. Because anything that you understand well, yourself, your family, your neighborhood, your job, your hobby, you can think about it in many ways. You can joke about it, you can make caricatures, you can dramatize it, you can convert it into a dialogue, you can make a chart. And so the pluralization of education not only reaches more people, but in terms of the brain, it activates more neural networks. And the more neural networks that are activated, the more your understanding is. So, from this theory, which is a psychological theory, a theory of how the mind is organized, some educational claims have emerged over the last 25 years. I want now to talk about the kinds of minds that we need in the future. So, globalization. Imagine with me megacities like Sao Paulo or Mexico City, where millions and millions of people have to live together, work, find ways of dealing with one another, even if they are of very different backgrounds. Think about brands which travel around the world. Fast food chains, movies, automobiles, clothing. So these are all examples of globalization, the movement of money, customs, and populations. The second feature is the biological revolution. Every month we're learning more about the brain. Every month we're learning more about genetics. And that information is going to affect education in very powerful ways. In your lifetime, students will come to school with a picture of their brain, a functional MRI, and a gene chip with their own unique genome, and they will say to teachers, "Teach me in a way that I can learn." And if the teachers cannot make sense of the brain image or the gene chip, then education will become a medical specialty because, of course, doctors and scientists are trained to read about the brain and to read about genetics. And already, and this is something I study, we can tell very early in life if a child is going to have reading problems, if the child is at risk for dyslexia, and we're beginning to know what kind of treatment will work for what kind of language problem. And the same thing will happen with each of the intelligences. So the biological revolution will have enormous impact in education, though only in the most specialized settings is it evident at the present time. The third revolution is the digital revolution. Computers, the World Wide Web, the Internet, all of these things are already beginning to have impact in education. And it's a situation, very unusual, where young people are much more sophisticated than older people. We distinguish between digital immigrants, which are most of you, and your children who are digital natives. And I'm a digital paleolith, but I'm trying to study and understand the new digital media because those are also huge changes that are occurring in our society. One other one I will mention is lifelong learning. In my grandparents' generation, most people didn't have even a secondary school education. In my parents' generation, most people didn't have to learn once they finished secondary school or the university. Now, of course, education everywhere has to be lifelong. And so not only do we need to know how we can continue to learn, but thank goodness we now know the brain is able to acquire new information for many, many years after adolescence. So now I'm